elderly gentlemen that I meet all around the world. Really, right after my time, it was Camelot for me, but because of a special circumstance of the things we were engaged in. But the total work school with all of those projects grew up really after my time, and they included what you had. Tell some of the things that you had in the
very
school.
well be true. Well, we added particularly, you just came in on that, this traveling school.
That was they were land yachts.
Land yachts with, ended up, not the first one that you were a faculty member just back from...
Not too much plot.
Okay, you were on one of the early ones, but it didn't have a shower bath in it. It didn't have a galley.
Anyway, it was one of the first trailers.
Oh, exactly.
Wasn't it the second ever made?
The first one was made for Vanderbilt. It was not built for what we were going to use. It was called the Aero Car. It was built like an airplane, very light, and must be towed behind a great. It
was the granddaddy of what we see everywhere in the world.
Exactly, but then later
that was part of what you took the boys on educational
tours, and that developed into beautiful things that we developed out of Greyhound buses with shower baths and so forth.
Super yachts.
And I think, Orson, I may be bragging, but the whole thing of schools taking their seniors to Washington for a week, for a day or two, which is so prevalent today, started with us, because we got the first trip that you went with us, we got a lot of publicity, and the next year, Oak Park High School did it, and the next year after that...
Mushroomed.
It mushroomed. And so now the big thing to do is to take a senior class to Washington for a final...
You didn't just do senior classes, you did other classes.
We did other classes, yes.
And you did more than just the land yacht. You had the boys build a stagecoach.
Oh, well...
You had a riding academy, you had an airdrome, and they learned how to fly planes,
well,
and you had a printing press. You had everything that interested you.
That's so right. Yeah, the airport was almost inexcusable, but I learned to fly, and I persuaded the powers that be that we should have an airport. The kids ran it, and by that time, a lot of them were learning to fly, and a lot of their parents came out and learned to fly. I thought in that time that it was going to be the most popular thing in the world, private flying, but it got to be that to go into a big airport was too dangerous, and so that's why private flying...
Yeah, well, never mind that.
Yeah.
The thing is, all the things that were happening at the school. There was the printing press we already know about.
And this 300-acre farm with a big...
working farm.
A working farm with a big herd on it. Now one of the biggest farmers in Florida has this tremendous spread. Started as a boy at 13. He was so interested
in Todd.
In Todd, and when our farm manager was apt to get drunk at times, this kid at 13 could take over a 40-cow barn dairy and run it beautifully. Then he got interested in that. He went to Cornell, took ag.
Aren't you saying by that, though, that part of the farm grew out of this boy's particular abilities?
To a certain extent, but his abilities grew out of the farm.
Out of the farm.
And many of our folks who were in some of our movies that we made later, they're now movie stars. Folks who got interested in music have their doctor's degrees in music, and they're teaching.
You had a movie studio on the, and I must tell our viewers that the movie studio came into being after I had long ceased to be a Todd boy.
Yeah, that was after you, but we had started the radio studio, and you broadcast...
That was only as a visitor later. There was no radio when I was in Todd.
There was a microphone in the dining room, and you did some... your first entertaining was in the dining room.
Why it was that Todd had to close?
Oh, boy. You crucify me. It's hard to put it in a capsule form. Why did 100 other schools, even colleges, have to close? The real reason that it closed was partly selfishness on my part. I wanted to get out from under, and I started getting a succession of people who were going to take over. And
did you really want to retire?
Oh, God, did I want to retire. Then I had my old dreams again of... By that time, I had, for no real reason, I had gotten myself a Master Mariner's ticket. I could get a job
You
aboard.
were a skipper.
Yeah.
In other words, you were what your nickname said.
That's right. I had taken these exams, and because I'd taught Celestial during the war, and I wanted to get out from under. Anyway.
And be a sailor, which was
and
your
be a
original
sailor,
plan.
exactly. Hortense, very few women have traveled over more thousands of miles of ocean than that gal. She's, well, we won't go into that, but I wanted to go into that, but go into sailing, but
so
the transfer of executive succession was a little difficult. One man who was very wonderful got polio right after he'd had a year of it, and that crucified that idea. He got very crippling polio.
Then your son, Roger Jr.
And then I could do the same thing my father had. I'd put in. This boy was very brilliant and had a master's degree, and I got him to come and teach in Todd. But what really...
But he is now not a teacher. He's
now
an enormously successful
Oh no,
businessman.
he's a really big shot in electronics. But the reason
that he's a big shot in electronics and not a teacher
is because you see, to have an accredited prep school, you have to be inspected. And the inspector that came the last year, the year before we closed, came into my office and said, "I have never seen such wonderful teaching as your son. He has 8th graders doing calculus. He's a born teacher. He's wonderful." I preface my remarks like this because I have to tell you something unpleasant. He can't teach for you next year unless he goes and gets some pedagogy credits. Yes, he's got his master's degree, but he's not an accredited teacher.
Which means that although he was better at teaching than anybody,
he was not allowed to teach. That, luckily, was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back.
That made Roger Jr. furious.
And he said, "My God, if this is the way education is, I don't know whether it's for me or not."
Your father had handed the torch to you, torch which you took only after deciding not to be a wayfaring stranger, a bum, or if we want to put it, a Conrad, a seaman.
Yeah.
Your son, Roger Jr., who is now a kind of electronics tycoon and is also a genius in that department, was originally by you intended to take the torch just as you had. And your intention in giving him that, as I understand it, was because you wanted to live that life which had been interrupted when you took over the
You're
school.
right, and it was partly selfish, and luckily he got disgusted with this proviso that he had to go way back to school even though he had his master's degree, and it's a long story, but that school could not have gone on unless it had the Ford Foundation or its reasonable facsimile.
Because it became
beside
economically
it.
impossible.
Because we had almost as many faculty as students. It was a kind of a Shangri-La, which doesn't make sense. It would have to have a better business manager than this guy, certainly.
Well, not even business manager would have to have enormous endowments.
Enormous endowments, that's
Yes.
right. And I think someday somebody might even start it up again on those ideas, but...
You can't, I think it depends. I think the school was really, existed because of you, and if it had continued, it would have become another school. Oh, don't you think a school is the reflection of the man who leads it?
Of course. What did Emerson say? Any institution is the reflection or the shadow of some individual, but and maybe it was slightly goofy school, but it was a definitely wonderful school. There's no doubt about it. The alumni that we have, the letters I've gotten since we put out this book are the most tearful, and very few people can attend their own funeral like we have. From maybe.
How do you mean?
Well, you know, Tom Sawyer came back and heard all the eulogistic things about him when they thought he was dead, and then here the same thing has come back to us because we wrote this book, and it's nostalgia for an amazing number. Well, not an amazing number. Maybe because we had thousands of boys, the fact that there's only 100 or two that really feel like they're our family is maybe it should have been more. I don't know, but there's a lot
How
of
could
it.
it have been that many? Yeah, I think the miracle is that it's that many, because I meet them all over the world, and they get dewy-eyed at the mention of the name Todd.
Yeah, it is a kind of a phenomenon. There's no doubt about it.
And it doesn't bother you at all that you were really wanted to give it all up and wanted to be a sailor. There's no bad conscience about that?
It was the most traumatic experience in the world. For a while, it took me 2 years to get over the feeling of being a dirty dog, without doubt. But I've gotten over it, and now I'm a gay dog,
God,
having a hell of a lot of fun.
Anything else wait for me, Gary?
that was great. You just told me a few minutes ago, to my genuine surprise, that this is the anniversary of your marriage.
62 years.
60. What is the precious metal celebrated on the
Oh, God,
62nd?
there's nothing. After, what is it, I know, golden 50, and then to hell with it from then on.
How did you meet?
How did we meet?
Yes.
Oh,
You
God,
want to really
that is
know?
story.
In high school, at the senior party of my high school sorority.
No, it was
That's when I met you.
your friend. I came up on a freight train to meet your friend that I had met in the...
How do you mean you came on a freight train?
He always used
There
to
was
do
a freight
that.
ran up from Champaign. I was a big freshman. She was only a senior in high school.
And what did you do? You rode in a freight car?
Yes.
Well, actually, it was the Fruit Express that came up through from New Orleans up through Champaign, and it was
You were in there with a lot of bananas.
a lot of bananas. That's right, and I was also in there with a drunk and a.
And a friend.
When I first broke into the thing, actually, I say a freight train. This Fruit Express was made up of old baggage cars, which had platforms on the end. In the old days, before they had passenger cars with vestibules, you got up on the platform and went in. So they had turned these into freight cars to take up this Fruit Express. And I stayed on the platform for about an hour, and it was so damn cold. I finally broke in, and a great man rose up that I thought was a policeman. He had a belt around and something hanging down, but instead of that, he was a great black man. And both of us were scared at that time. But we rode on up to Chicago, and he got off, stealing a few crates of lettuce or something as he dropped off on the south side of Chicago. And I kept on until the damn thing stopped someplace, and the fellow chased me out. Anyway.
But how did you meet Hortense? Was she also riding the baggage cars?
No, I was coming up.
He was
I was
dirty.
coming up to
Let me
meet her
tell it.
friend, and
Because you don't tell it right.
I tell it exactly. I was coming up to have a date with her friend, and she phoned and said, "I'm with another friend of mine, and it was in your house. So we came to that house. Okay, that's how I got
But
to
you
meet
were
you
all
first.
cleaned up because
Sure.
he had to go to the Marshall Fields in charge of soup because he was so dirty, and I guess he thought he needed the soup. So he came all starched up and sat down on the couch, and that was death because he was so tired. Pretty soon he kept wobbling over to the couch, and finally I said to my friend, "Shh, he's asleep." And so we tiptoed out of the porch and left him sleeping there on the couch. And pretty soon he woke up, or sometime he did, while we were giggling inside, and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was very tired, and I'll give you a call later." And off he went. And that was when I
That was the first romantic encounter.
That was a romantic encounter. And
But you were married 62 years ago today.
That's right.
In the morning,
No, at 4 o'clock.
at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Where?
And his blind grandmother.
in the same
And
the
father
same
came.
apartment where I'd gone to sleep on the on the couch out there.
Father looking down his nose. I think he was a little surprised that we had such a nice house. He'd never been there.
Oh well, no, he knew your parents were big, semi-big shots in Chicago. Your father was a big lawyer, but he was against you because he was only reason he hadn't put his foot down. This very stern guy was because he was sure you were pregnant through me, and he was stymied.
Was she pregnant?
Oh, she was.
We
The
went-
amazing thing.
We went 18 months before we had a baby, and I'm so proud.
The amazing thing is that gal. Nobody would have believed it.
Now, never don't talk about
I
it.
was
This is
a-
on the phone. Don't talk about private things.
No, it
Well, all
just
right.
happened that you were a virgin the night we were married,
All right.
and nobody else would. Why is that private? I'm
It is.
bragging about
I don't
you.
think anybody
I'm
else
mainly
cares.
bragging about myself because the only reason you were a virgin was because I had some control. You had absolutely none. I was not a
You're going to
virgin.
be able to cut some of this out. Gosh, I want this to go.
No,
Even if my history is almost over.
that's absolutely true.
I'm not saying it's a lie. I'm just saying you should control your tongue.
I'm not a noble guy, but I was the noble person because you
He
got
was
so
very-
frightened at what we had
very
done,
frightened.
what you had learned about sex, and that was all very evil. And you practically went into a nervous breakdown, and so your mother had you come home, and you stayed home for a whole semester.
That's right. She was wise.
She was wise, but no, she was absolutely a virgin when I married her.
Okay, well, that's not to brag.
It
You know,
is to brag.
it's- in 1916, that was not
No,
unusual.
it was the norm, but it was not the norm for. Everybody knew that we had done a lot of things. Crossed Lake Michigan in my father's yacht and slept together and stayed overnight and.
Oh,
and all the
virtuously.
time, only because I was noble. Because
She was ready.
any minute. I guarantee that.
I don't like this, and I think it should be all cut out. We had, I thought, a nice apartment in the city, and we were going to stay there with our new baby.
Oh, don't start in there and
Yeah,
take
why
us
don't
through
you want-
62 years.
Well, that's the beginning.
I don't even want the end. I want a general comment on it.
Oh,
And how the hell you
Well-
happen to stick with him that long?
How did you stick
because
with
it
it?
never bored me. That's why.
Never bored you.
Never bored
But
me.
tell the truth, she married me for the absolute worst reasons in the world.
Oh, now that's a lie.
Honey, it isn't a lie.
It is a lie. I don't like to have you
It
tell
was to
me.
reform me, and everybody warned you against this bum, this college bum.
No, but when we were married, he got a letter from the Dean of Men, who he'd had a lot of alterations with. That's the right word.
Altercations.
Altercations with. And the letter said, all right, if you get married, just always do what Hortense says and you will not go wrong. You know, I couldn't find that letter. I wanted to keep it for a recommendation. But he ate it or something.
Of course, he and many others didn't want you to marry me.
Did away with it.
There was
It's
There was
all-
an awful teacher that you were crazy about, and a nice guy, but he tried to break up the marriage because he wanted you to marry the captain of the football team. Back in those days, he happened to be head of the YMCA, and he was a obnoxious character.